Robin Tolochko is going to come up first from Uber. She's going to talk about how her cartographic education prepared her for a mapping job in tech, or how it didn't. So please welcome Robin Tolochko.
My name is Robin Tolochko, and I'm here to talk about how my cartographic education prepared me, or not, for a mapping job in tech. Before I launch into telling you about my professional side, I thought I'd take a moment to introduce myself as a person. I'm originally from Atlanta, but now call San Francisco home, and over the last 10 years, I've moved around to 5 different cities. I like to bike, I like to hike, I like dystopian novels, I'm a feminist, and I'm a mom. Today is also my 8th wedding anniversary, but per usual, I'm missing it to be here at NASIS instead of with my awesome husband, Jerry. Happy anniversary, Jerry. But anyways, what you're probably most interested in is the fact that I work with maps. So what do I do? These days, I am a product manager on the maps team at Uber. On the off chance that you've never heard of Uber before, it's a tech company that helps people who want to get from point A to point B connect with people who are willing to take them there. And as a product manager, it's my job to set the vision for what the team wants to accomplish, to make sure we're working on the most impactful projects, and to set the roadmap, pun intended, to get there. But I started off at Uber a little over a year ago as a designer on the cartography team. So the teams that I work with at Uber are the map display and cartography teams. These are the engineering and design teams in charge of the visual display of the map in Uber's in-app navigation system for drivers. As a side note, my colleague Katie Waxman is giving a talk tomorrow morning about designing our navigation system. Highly recommend getting up early to go see it. It's going to be awesome. So how did I get to where I am today? I don't actually want to talk too much about this because I hate the idea of a career path, and I think they're silly. Well, they're not silly, but for me at least it was silly, so I just want to say to students out there, I can tell you that I did not set out in 2008 when I graduated from college to be doing what I'm doing today. My career path has been a long and windy road with many unforeseen twists and turns. But the one thing I do want to point out is that, because it's actually relevant to this talk, is that I graduated from UW-Madison in 2016 with a master's in cartography before starting my job at Uber. Quick disclaimer, because there may be some academics in the room, this talk is very subjective. It's just based on my personal experience. I'm not trying to represent everyone everywhere. So, again, what I'm going to be talking about is what did I learn in school, and how has my perception of that changed or been expanded in my job? And the things that I'm going to talk about fall into 2 big buckets: cartographic principles and people and processes. So first, cartographic principles. The first one is contrast. So in school, I learned contrast is this idea that you can distinguish adjacent map features from each other. And in working on Uber's map, and you can see the top one here is our map that's used during the daytime, and the bottom one is our map that's used during the nighttime. We have to design a map that's going to work in all sorts of unknown conditions. It could be really sunny, and there could be glare on the driver's phone. It could be raining. They could have the brightness on their phone turned up really high. They could have the brightness on their phone turned down really low. And we have to try and hit a sweet spot that will work for most people in most situations. So in terms of contrast, we initially actually had a lighter gray background, and then we got feedback that people had a hard time actually distinguishing the roads from the background. When we were sitting at our desks in the office, it looked totally fine, but when you brought it out on the road, you could tell there just wasn't enough contrast between the background and the roads, so we had to darken that. And getting the right amount of contrast is a careful balance between making sure that the important features stand out, but not so much that it's jarring. Visual hierarchy. So visual hierarchy is this idea that more important features should look more important on the map. And in terms of now, what I've learned is, drivers are glancing at this map while operating a vehicle. Your message needs to come through instantaneously. So they're not going to notice all of the details. They are driving, and they probably got 1 second to look at the map. So imagine you're a driver, and I've learned that visual hierarchy, what you want to stand out in your visual hierarchy, depends on what's happening at that moment in time. So when a driver gets a dispatch and they're seeing like, okay, where's the rider? Probably the only thing they're going to see is the route line, and that's like the path that they're going to take, quick path they're going to take, and like generally what direction the rider is from them. But at the moment of pickup, when they're actually going to pick up a rider, the most important thing will be, well, where is that rider's pickup location? And that needs to be the most prominent thing. And then less prominent but still important things are things like road labels and POI labels to help orient the driver. Generalization. This is the concept that you remove unnecessary detail from the map. And while I always knew or learned in school that generalization is important for clarity of information, in my job I've learned that it's actually really important for performance on a mobile device. So imagine that you're a driver in India using a low-end Android device from 2009. Your cell data plan might be limited, and you might have a really spotty cell connection. So when you're using the map as an Uber driver, every bit of data that you don't have to download to your phone really helps. It goes a long way. So this is where generalization comes in. And for the record, we call this simplification at Uber, but it's the same idea. So every bit of detail that we can remove helps. So for example, with building footprints, if there's a more complex building footprint that's, say, 10 points, if we can reduce it to 6 points and have it still generally look fine, then we're going to do that because it makes the map load faster. Label placement. In school, I learned you should meticulously place labels in the perfect position on the map. But in my job, I've learned that that it's really hard to write perfect labeling rules for all different contexts in all different parts of the world. You can't always predict what angle the map will be at when a driver is driving along a route. Are they doing a short route from downtown San Francisco to a museum? Are they doing a long route from the airport in Boston to the suburbs? They have to go through a tunnel or something. So do they have a Galaxy with a large screen or an iPhone 4 with a tiny screen? So we can't predict these scenarios. So we write rules that generally work in most situations. And also thinking about, at what points do you want to emphasize road labels or POI labels, and trying to write these general rules that work for most situations. And then the last cartographic principle is this concept of user-centered design. And this is really a general design principle that is applied to cartography. And it's the idea that you should design with the user in mind, making sure that the map that you're making lets them do what they want to do. And on the job, I've learned that this is really the most important principle. You have to think about the user's context. So in the case of Uber drivers, they're on a tiny screen that's 3 feet away from their face, and they're using it while they're driving. So glanceability is really the most important thing for our users. And then to understand how people are using the maps, you really have to have a lot of user empathy. And there's lots of different ways to do this. One is we get in the cars ourselves, and we actually drive using our navigation system and see what works and what doesn't. But even more important than that is talking with the people who actually use this for their jobs, because for their livelihood. We may be biased. We're the people looking at this all day long at our computer screens, but the people who are using it out in the world may have different things may work or not work for them. All right, next category, people and processes. This is stuff that isn't always formally taught in school, but which you kind of pick up along the way anyways. So first one is the design process. In school, I learned about the design squiggle. For those of you who didn't learn this, it's the concept that at the beginning of the creative process, you don't know how it's all going to turn out at the end. And what I've learned is that the design squiggle is totally real. When you start off at the beginning of a project, it's not always clear how you'll get to the end. Or sometimes you don't even have the words to describe the problem that you're trying to solve. And And it's this process of creation that actually brings clarity to the problem. There's lots of iterations, there's lots of talking with other people and just trying to find that right solution, kind of struggling through the squiggle until you get to that clarity. So you have to embrace the uncertainty at the beginning. Next up, teamwork. In school, I learned how to complete a project with 3 people, which was awesome. But on the job, I've learned how to create a product with hundreds of people that people all around the world use. And this is something that I really love. There are lots of inputs and stakeholders, and one thing that's really wonderful is that when you bring all of these people together, you create something maybe different than what you would have done if it was just you, and I think that's just really, really cool. So a few tips for working with teams. 1, don't be afraid to ask questions, even at the risk of sounding dumb, especially clarifying questions that you can't just Google. So I'm often that person in a meeting who asks a dumb question, and usually afterwards, several people come up to me and say, "Oh, thank you so much for asking that. I was thinking it, but I was just too afraid to ask." It can be really scary, but just do it anyways. All right, next tip for working with teams. Be prepared going into a meeting. Prepare an agenda beforehand. Make sure to lay out what's the background information that everyone in the room needs to be aligned on before we can even talk about this thing. What's the problem that we're trying to solve? What are possible solutions? What's the goal? What are we trying to do at the end? And it's also really important to keep people on track in a meeting. It's really easy to rabbit hole into interesting but irrelevant details. And so gently keeping people on track so that you can actually come out at the end of the meeting with a decision or action items to move forward. And then last, get to know your teammates as people. Don't eat lunch at your desk. Get to know your coworkers. This will, first of all, just help you enjoy your job more. And it also helps you actually be more effective at your job if you know the people that you work with and know how to communicate with them. All right, next up, critique. In school, I was a TA, and I learned how to grade assignments according to a rubric and occasionally give additional feedback. And on the job, I've learned that being able to give actionable feedback is an essential skill. What I mean by actionable feedback isn't just, that looks great, or that looks terrible, but actually being able to identify and express what looks great, or what looks terrible, or what works, or what doesn't work, and why, and then try to think of concrete suggestions for something else to try if what they're doing isn't working. It's hard, and you're probably going to feel really awkward at first, and it takes lots of practice. But if you're able to push through that awkwardness, I promise it will serve you and your colleagues well. And then the flip side of this is it's also really important to solicit and receive feedback. It's scary. Again, it's really scary to ask people to legit tell you how you're doing, but it will actually make you better at your job. And then last up, measuring success. In school, I learned if I got an A, I should pat myself on the back and say I did a good job. But in my work, that's not really how it works. The only thing that matters is the map that you're making or is the product that you're making working for the people that use it? Does it work with your users? There's no rubric or roadmap to follow. And so this really depends on what is the purpose of your map, and how you measure success will be different from how I measure success for my map. It really depends on what are the goals of the user, and is the map helping them achieve those goals? All right. What's the takeaway here? For educators in the room, it's impossible to fully prepare students for the working world. But you can think about the hard and soft skills that you should at least try to expose them to. I can tell you that I've used a lot of the skills that I learned in school on the job, just now it's at a much bigger scale. And a big part of this is making sure that students understand that problems don't always have a simple solution or even one possible solution. Give open-ended exercises to students that have them solve a real world problem, not a contrived one, but like an actual one. And for students, embrace the design squiggle and the uncertainty of a problem when you first begin to tackle it. There might not be a paper published about it that you can look up, or like a roadmap to follow. And having a portfolio also isn't just about having a set of beautiful maps that you just put on your website. A lot of it is also being able to talk about what is your process, how did you think through how to do that, how to solve that problem. So in sum, embrace the design squiggle and talk with your users. Thank you.